It's the last session. Hope I won't wake you guys up if you're sleeping. I'll keep this interesting. So today, I have touched upon something that we have been doing called FIDO Alliance last year. And this is a follow-up thing, and last year was in the Internet of IoT Forum. This year we're going to present in a Cloud Security Forum, and thanks to Tech, the company which has sponsored this speech, also the FIDO Alliance member. So what's happening in the industry now? The cloud security, cloud computing has become one of the happening thing now, and it's growing very, very fast, as you guys know. And this is some of the projections that are given by market research, and this is growing very, very fast, as we all know. And the nature of cloud computing also is changing very fast. It's not just about moving the data to the cloud and trying to access from the application standpoint. With the cloud computing, also, the number of attacks have been rampant. More than ever. Last 2 years, the kind of attacks that we have seen are pretty major and in a very large scale. These are very serious attacks. Russian criminals stole about 1.2 billion accounts very recently, a couple of years ago. And bank customers, like phishing attacks primarily, from the application standpoint, not even knowing, without even knowing which one you're accessing to, you will be accessing an application, putting user ID password, and that may not be the application you're looking into, and the other party who is actually receiving that site will now have the user ID and password. And classic malware attacks, where financial transactions, you think you are actually trying to pay for something and for somebody, but in the background, malware actually takes it and does something else with the transaction. These are some of the very major attacks that are happening in the industry. You have seen the attacks on the Target, attacks on the eBay, attacks on the LinkedIn, attacks on the Yahoo, and everywhere these attacks are going. What is common about all these things is server-side attacks. Somebody goes on the server side and steals a bunch of online account identities, and they start using them. How is this happening right now? If you see conventionally, the authentication, what I'm going to focus today is about the authentication part of it. Some of our earlier speakers, like Andrew from NXP, has spoken about what is the importance of authentication. If we don't authenticate properly, everything crumbles down. Conventionally, any of the cloud computing, the way that authentication happens is you have a device as a user. Either you go and then access the content on the cloud computing side by simply putting a user ID and password into device, and device is what then sends to the backend. Backend systems in the cloud computing, in addition to having user ID and password that comes to, they have their own sophisticated risk analysis and then footprinting and all that kind of stuff, which by the time before you actually go and then give the user ID and password, actually the backend side pretty much know who you are, about 90% of accuracy. And the last 10% is about actually specifically getting user ID and password. So this is the conventional way of how somebody attacks, how somebody actually accesses the cloud resources and cloud information. This is what's happening right now. In all these things, the main problem is somebody actually goes to the cloud by giving the user ID and password. That's the first step that's happening. Passwords is, I think Andrew, which is a security, comes from a security company, but he says that he uses about 3 to 4 passwords across 15, 16 accounts that he has. That is from a security person. So that is from a common user standpoint, it is true. All of us have now multiple email accounts, multiple bank accounts, multiple financial institutions accounts, multiple social networking accounts. All these things, we, on a regular basis, close to about 25 times we access. We put our user ID and password according to Microsoft study. User ID and password, we use about 25 times a day, which means there are 25 attack vectors on any given life, in any given person's life. And phishing is a major problem. Not only that, unlike earlier, we are using a varied amount of mobile devices to go and access the backend information. Particularly when you're going more towards mobile computing, you have touch screens. Putting user ID and password is a nightmare. I mean, when most of us keep driving and try to access the information, too many passwords to remember, it's inconvenient to actually enter. And on top of that, the more and more touch screen related stuff coming in, more and more it is becoming difficult to use it. Unlike earlier days, the user ID, password, and cloud authentication is not just restricted to somebody actually using informational access. Now the world is changing. Now you are using this for various types of things. It doesn't have to be just information access. It's personal data, security, privacy becomes the main thing. And not only that, personalization. There were some nice examples given by IBM, gentleman and lady from IBM, about home networking, how we start using them, how those things are vulnerable with respect to cloud computing standpoint. If you see the way the informational access happens or lifestyle management access happens, authentication is key piece of everything. Before we start doing anything, if somebody wants to set up and start a home networking, turn on the thermostat at home, the first step is somebody has to operate and go to that particular device. And the first step, if it is not done properly, middle of the night, 2 o'clock, somebody shuts off your thermostat in a winter night, then you are in trouble. Authentication becomes the fundamental first step for us to do anything in the internet on the cloud computing side. I think both lady from IBM and as well as Andrew were mentioning, if you see, there are the data information related, IT related technology aspects of what we do. Second thing is the actual operational. When you want to go and then check your bank account, that is one kind of informational access on the cloud computing. The other thing is actually, opening a garage door or starting a thermostat or powering on lights. It becomes a part of the connected world in the cloud computing side. Unlike earlier, where we specifically were using the internet and cloud computing primarily for informational access, now we are actually using that for controlling the device and other stuff in the cloud. And it's just not the next wave of things that are happening are the Internet of Things. And the 2 or 3 speakers that spoke before me, the Internet of Things is a huge thing, where thermostats is being controlled, the cars are being controlled, dishwashers are being controlled. This is a new way of things that are happening. Adding to this particular thing that's happening right now, where everything is controlled from a cell phone or something remotely, you also have wearables now coming. The wearables that are coming are different kinds of wearables. It could be medical devices, it could be monitors, medical signals, any of those things. When you are going towards those things, the main purpose, first step of the process, right now wearables are using right now as gadgets. They don't have a clear direction of what what they can be. A Bluetooth-enabled wearable can be used to link up with your cell phone, which will act automatically turning on and off, or a second-factor authentication kind of a thing. This is the kind of thing that's happening right now. And if you go back to one of the charts that, again, I point to Andrew, which resonates to what I've been telling here, is if you see the biggest concerns in the cloud computing that from the research that they have done is, first thing is interoperability. Second thing is the security. Third one is the privacy and other aspects of that. If you see these things, the wearables, Internet of Things that are happening right now, they're happening without any standards at a given direction with respect to openness of those things. Unlike the informational access side, where you have majority 2 or 3 kinds of operating systems. One is Apple, the other one is Microsoft, the third one is Google. On the wearable side, Internet of Things, every one of them is proprietary. Every one of them have their own way of handling things. The standards just don't exist there. And based on the new wearables and the Internet of Things that are coming, The controlling device and information access device are now being used in a much bigger way. Mobile payments, personalization, m-commerce, Internet of Things, cloud services, every one of them are either being used from a desktop or activated from a desktop or being controlled by a cell phone. In all these things, first step you do is authentication. You have got to know who is actually operating, who is actually authorized to use it, which device is authorized to use. For all these things, authentication becomes the first primary step of what you're trying to do. Without that, you really don't have security after that. You can actually control a very strong end-to-end security system from going from the chipset level iron to the cloud, but the person who is operating that is not the right person if he happens to have a user ID password. All the security that you have done end-to-end is completely compromised. If you see the latest developments that are happening, the thing that Touch ID service, what Apple has done, and Microsoft Google announced about the recent announcement about having a different way of logging in. The second screen that he puts out doesn't necessarily have to be a password. It could be a biometric information. It could be something else. It could be a speech. It could be a second factor, anything of that kind. So this is where the FIDO Alliance comes into picture. Last year, I was here presenting it. We were 1 year old at the time, and now we're 2 years old, and we have made significant progress. And like the prior speakers explained, lack of interoperability, lack of standards is a huge issue. Unfortunately, the world, whichever way you want to say, the world is always going to be a heterogeneous environment. There is not going to be one type of authentication, one type of device, one type of cloud computing, one type of appliance it's going to be there. World is evolving fast. Yesterday, Iris, for instance, based authentication was not a production worthy. Today is completely production worthy. Tomorrow, some other kind of sensor comes into picture. Fingerprinting, biometrics has been there in the market for 15, 16 years on the commercial side. But Apple made it very successful, became the mainstream. More and more, as you are evolving, more and more new kinds of services and new kind of authenticators are going to come, new type of devices are going to come, new kinds of, the endpoints are going to come. You are going to control various kinds of things. Someone, a lady from IBM was mentioning about a pacemaker or a medical recorded data sensor emanating data and then going to the cloud. In that scenario, you absolutely have to know whose data is it. I don't want to be putting my son's data as my data on the back-end side. So from this standpoint, you have various kinds of things. If you don't have a standards-based approach, you're not really going to win. If you see the earlier days where how SSL became a big way of securing the websites and making sure the clients know which websites they are dealing with from data encryption standpoint. And then if you see Wi-Fi standards, and if you see Bluetooth standards, how they became, they all became widely successful. We are all enjoying the benefits of that because it's a open standard and everybody contributed to that. And the authentication and the cloud computing is also a very complex problem. It cannot be solved by a single company. And this is part of the reason the FIDO Alliance, since the inception, we always talked about bringing in everybody in the industry, trying to provide the inputs into what we're trying to do here. What is different about FIDO approach is we actually split the authentication process into new steps. I think from earlier speeches, as we know, in the enterprise market, more and more people are bringing their own devices. And gentleman from SAP was mentioning he went and bought a Samsung phone from China, immediately enabled it, and started using the system. And you have got to allow them. You have got to understand there will be different kinds of phones and different kinds of the endpoints that are coming into the picture. In FIDO approach, we actually split the authentication process into two things. First thing, you authenticate yourself to the device, whatever the device could be, in whatever authentication format that's available on that. Some phones might have a good iris scanner. Some phones might have a fingerprint scanner. Some phones might have a just powerful 3D camera, which can do facial detection. You authenticate yourself to the device, and device then does the second level of authentication, where a backend cloud service or a backend cloud device authorizes particular device to be able to talk to that during the first initial setup process. That is done using an open protocol, a FIDO protocol. It is a standardized protocol. It's based off of asynchronous keys and completely based on challenge response, which changes each time going back and forth. And this completely eliminates any need for any passports to be remembered, any passports to be exchanged on the network. For any of these things that we are trying to do, if somebody goes and attacks the server side, gets the user ID and password, then whatever you're doing after that is, most of the passports are being stolen either on the server side or man-in-the-middle attack, dictionary attack, malware attacks, these kind of phishing attacks, these kind of standard attacks. These attacks are possible because server side actually holds all the private information. Your user ID and your passport is your private. Server side hosts that. And the person who is attacking on the server side is actually stealing a whole bunch of server side secrets that he can go and attack after that. What FIDO does is the key generation happens on the client, and the public key is what gets sent to the service or server on the server side, and each time the response changes based on the challenge that comes back. So if somebody wants to attack on the server side or the cloud computing side, tries to steal something, all they get is a bunch of private keys, which is of no use. So from last year, the FIDO Alliance officially was announced in February 2013 with 6 companies and the founding members. And today we are 200 plus companies. Actually, you probably have seen Intel's announcement today that they have joined the FIDO Alliance today. And we have released our spec, 1.0 spec back in December. And we are now making it available for open industry standards right now. These are some of the companies that are involved in driving the FIDO Alliance. NXP happens to be one of the board members too. And so is Microsoft, so is Google, so is IBM today. Not IBM, sorry, Intel today. And NTT Docomo recently joined. We are about 200 companies strong right now. And if you see the Alliance the timeline, although the Alliance was started, from vision standpoint back in 2000 by me and a guy from PayPal, CISO called Michael Barrett, we officially launched the FIDO Alliance back in February 2013 during RSA. At the time of announcement, we only had 6 people basically coming in as founding members. And we actually announced the FIDO Ready program back in December 2013. Unlike other standards bodies, here what we have done is, while we are developing the spec, we also have the people who are interested in deploying it. So while the spec is being developed, we actually were writing code. And actually, I happen to be the founder of the company which implemented the first version of the FIDO Alliance UAF spec, which is called Knock Knock Labs. And we have released our specification review draft back in February 2014. And while we announced that, we actually had the real-life deployments, both from Google on the U2F side, UAF side, Alipay, PayPal. Samsung has put in the FIDO components on the client side on the cell phone, Samsung S5 and Note 4 and Note 3 and that kind of stuff. The final spec of 1.2 was released just last in December, and we are on the way to make it available for open standards now. What are the benefits of FIDO? I think somebody in the earlier, I think SAP, gentlemen, you can have a lot of good things that are happening and you can provide a lot of technology, but if it is not easy to use, people are not going to use it. One of the things when we actually designed FIDO, the things that we have kept in our mind is usability has to be the first and foremost criteria. If it is not extremely easy to use, it's not going to get adopted. And when we designed that, we also thought about the security and the privacy is very important. The privacy, the keys that you generate for each service and each cloud on the back end is different for each service that you do it. So there is no trackability between site to site. So you provide the privacy like that. And then there are no more passwords on the wire. Somebody wants to phish it, somebody wants to dictionary attack it, malware in the middle. None of those are possible because you're not actually putting any password on the wire anymore. Security. It's based on security, asynchronous photography, asymmetric cryptography. So each time when the server or a cloud side wants to challenge you, it actually throws a random challenge, you respond to that. That right response to that comes from the specific private key that you have on the client side, which gets released only when you are authenticated. Speed, it is fast. If you're using, if you see what Docomo launched just last week, it is enabled the fingerprinting and also iris scanning at the same time. Today, if you are a Docomo consumer, and you can simply order and do Docomo-based services simply by either touching it, one touch, or one blink, or a one phrase, you just use it and then go from there. It's extremely fast. So 2015 alone, we have made significant progress in the FIDO Alliance. You guys probably have seen Microsoft's announcement that Windows 10 is going to have FIDO at the core, 2.0 at the core. And that has been announced. Qualcomm and Knock Knock Labs joined together have actually announced the Snapdragon having a FIDO at the core, where any Snapdragon process goes out, will automatically have built-in FIDO thing there. And Google has announced the support tools and management tools for FIDO for the enterprise. See, if you're using Google Mail or Google applications for an enterprise, U2F token will actually be the second factor in strong authentication. Entity Docomo is one of the most interesting things that we have had for FIDO Alliance, where unlike earlier, where we had PayPal and Alipay type of companies launching FIDO Alliance, FIDO software on the server side, eliminating the password. What Docomo has done is very significant and very, very major, where they have moved the entire ecosystem with them. The entire ecosystem, primarily the cell phone guys, the operating system guys, the chipset guys, everybody participated from start to finish. We finished deployment of Docomo in less than 9 months, from chipset enablement to final deployment of FIDO services on the Docomo network. These are some of the very interesting things that have happened, and it's fast growing. And as I mentioned today, Intel also announced the joining of FIDO Alliance. So I founded both of them. The difference between FIDO Alliance and Knock Knock Labs is FIDO Alliance is a specification generator. It is the standard alliance body. It's a nonprofit organization where people join that and pay dues and fees and that kind of stuff. It's not an open source community, it's an open standard promotion community. Knock Knock Labs is the first implementer of the FIDO UF 1.2 server, and the 3 or 4 deployments that are there in the major scale in the market today are from Knock Knock Labs. Why is this, why is FIDO Alliance has taken so much traction in the last couple of years? The market demand is there. Market demand in the sense the number of attacks that have happened on the internet is significantly improved. Number of people using multiple cloud accounts have increased dramatically, unlike earlier, where all of us have one enterprise account and a couple of bank accounts and one email. Now it is multiplied. Everyone is looking for easier way to do it, and this fits into and also the availability of scalable, high quality biometric technology that are in the various formats, thanks to Apple's iPhone, which made pretty much fingerprinting is the game in the town. It is much, much simpler. It is much easy to use. There are no network passwords to remember. If I am a service provider, there are no passwords to be phished, middleware attacked, malware attacked, any of those things. Unlike the earlier days, if you see last 4 or 5 speakers that were on board, in front of me, there are a number of things that are happening. You are having the IoT devices, you are having new devices, wearables that are coming together, and you don't know really what else is going to come. So whenever there is a change in the client side DNA, whenever there is a change in the form factor of the client side, the service provider at the cloud side cannot go back and re-implement these things. He should be ready tomorrow if a new form factor device comes in, a new sensor comes in. I don't want to go back and then re-engineer everything and re-enable a new thing. I want to have a mechanism where I should be catering to the upcoming future unknown devices that come to me for either informational access or command control kind of a thing. In both scenarios, I want to make sure that I have something that is extendable, that is future-proof, and that is easy to use. So this is the, with that, I think I'm finished. Thank you very much. And if you have any further questions, please contact FIDO Alliance or personally me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesanupalli, for joining us today.